You ever have one of those first nights in a new house where everything feels right and then, out of nowhere, the world decides otherwise? We were 3 hours in boxes half unpacked, a pizza on the counter when a woman started yelling through our living room window like she owned the place. She called it a safety hazard, she called it an eyesore, and she called the police to back up her performance, all before she even introduced herself. My name is Daniel Avery. And this is the story of how a suburban neighborhood turned into a war over a blanket and how that blanket pulled up a lot more dirt than any of us expected. Leah, my wife, likes plants and lists and quiet Sunday mornings. Me, I tinker with radios and tell myself I'm handy, which is how we ended up with a thrift store red throw on the couch because it made the living room feel like home. Evelyn Hart introduced herself 2 minutes after the sirens. She was the HOA president, polished nails, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a cardigan-like armor. "You can't have that out here," she said, tapping the glass with civility wrapped in teeth. "Community standards," she insisted, as if standards were something you could measure with a ruler. At first it felt ridiculous, a blanket, but it wasn't the complaint so much as the tone, the need to assert control. We explained, inside, not visible from the street. Evelyn nodded like a judge, then slid into that power script. "We'll have a hearing." It felt performative, a rattle of rules and a chance to flex. Small complaints became a pattern, a notice about an unapproved garden gnome, a demand to trim hedges, 2 fines that arrived the same week. Someone slashed the soft top of my truck one night, a long, angry cut, like teeth in fabric. Police were polite, helpful to a point, but I remember the way one officer's eyes flicked to the HOA notice and then away, like it was an awkward afterthought. Leah wanted to pay the fines and move on. I couldn't. There comes a moment when you choose whether small daily indignities will define your life, or whether you'll push back and see what's underneath. We started recording interior cameras, timestamps, photos of every notice, not for drama, but because patterns become motives, and motives become evidence. Mrs. Gable, down the street, mattered. She'd been here 30 years, kept a garden that looked like a postcard and a memory for names. Over tea she told us how Evelyn had arrived quietly, volunteered for cleanup days, then slid into power. "She's tidy, Daniel," Mrs. Gable said, "and tidy looks like trust until it doesn't." She handed me a stack of faded meeting notes from the community center, a ledger of complaints that, when read together, began to smell like selection, not enforcement. We dug into public records and found notes that didn't match Evelyn's public rhetoric. Near-identical complaints filed against people who opposed a particular parcel, exemptions granted to those aligned with board members, and a development interest flagged in a county filing that put Evelyn's signatures near the top. Suddenly, preserving character read like a checklist for someone who wanted a say in what land changed hands. Rosa, our lawyer, was the kind that looks like she's always been ready for a fight. She told us to keep calm, keep records, and be precise. "Nobody wins yelling," she said, "but evidence wins." She taught us how to request meeting minutes, how to phrase questions in public forums, and how to frame our story so the board couldn't dismiss it as sour grapes. The hearing arrived like a small war. Fluorescent lights, a table scarred by years of argument, Evelyn at the head with her retinue. She read complaints and bylaws with the air of a person reading scripture. When I spoke, I didn't wave the folder around like a weapon. I told the truth plainly: the sirens the first night, the slashed truck, the pattern that looked like an underline on a page. Evelyn's voice cut through like a practiced knife. "You're making accusations without basis," she said, "and that's disruptive." She smiled when she said it, a smile that tried to bury everything dissonant. Then she leaned in and asked in that way people ask when they want to score a point, "Are you suggesting I do this for profit?" It was a gladiator question, meant to force a 2-word answer that made a person look small if they hesitated. Leah answered before I could. "We're saying there's a pattern," she said, and her voice didn't tremble. "We're asking for clarity and consistency." That line, pattern and clarity, stuck with the room, like a chord being struck. Rosa then did what lawyers do when they want truth to be simple. She showed a timeline. Dates, filings, votes. Where Evelyn had offered an opinion, there were public records that showed action. It was a slow undoing of performance and evidence-driven strip that left a person looking smaller than their rhetoric. The board voted to dismiss the fines, and order an independent review. Evelyn left with less swagger and more questions, and for a while the neighborhood held its breath like someone who's just exhaled after a punch. Not everything came clean. The review turned up odd entries in the HOA accounts, and a pattern of dismissed complaints that began to look coordinated. Then came the late-night hammering on our back door, a noise that rattles you in a way polite notices never will. The camera caught a figure hooded and quick, a presence that wanted to be terrifying but left only traces. Police traced leads to a person who rented rooms to a committee member's acquaintance, small threads linking larger hands. Motive: keep dissent quiet, maintain control. That didn't erase the fear, but it drew a map of how intimidation had been organized and financed. There were small victories: neighbors who came forward with stories, an elderly man who showed up with a legal pad full of odd fees, a young couple who refused to sign a petition and lost friends over it. We learned how power feels to those on the receiving end, not violent in the blockbuster sense, but relentless and precise, a drip that wears away courage. The real cinematic moment was quiet. In a packed community center meeting, someone asked Evelyn a simple question about a donation listed in the ledger. She paused, that human pause when a rehearsed script falls into silence. The room made a sound like a turned page. People noticed that the person who had once controlled the rhythm could be stopped by one honest inquiry. Power doesn't disappear, it mutates. We didn't solve every problem, but the ledger was out in the open, conversations changed, and rules that had been weaponized were now subject to scrutiny. People started asking for receipts. Meetings grew fuller. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down began to speak. There was a cost, of course. Leah and I lost the blissful anonymity new homeowners sometimes enjoy. Neighbors asked questions, some friends pulled away, and there were nights I woke up rehearsing what I'd say if someone came to the door. But there was also a strange, tender side to it. People who had been afraid to speak found company, and the small kindnesses mattered: a casserole left on the porch, a neighbor who sat with us while we filed paperwork, a neighbor who offered to water our plants when we were away. Most of all, what changed was the story people told themselves. Where once complaints were shrugged off as how things are, now there was a question: who does this really benefit? When someone uses rules as levers, it's not about the rules, it's about the hand on the lever. Why tell you this? Because small things can expose big truths. A blanket on a couch should be just a blanket. If it becomes a reason to call the police, to slash a truck, to issue fines, look for the ledger. Turn pages. Ask questions. Talk to your neighbors. If you've been on the wrong end of a thinly veiled power play, share what happened and how you handled it. If you think we overreacted, tell us why. I'd rather be wrong and wiser than right and quiet. Hit like if you want more stories like this. Share if you know someone who's dealt with HOA nonsense. And subscribe if you're new. We'll keep digging into the small moments that reveal so much.